At the end of 1 Samuel chapter 8, God told Samuel, find them a king. Give them what they're asking for. And we're introduced to a character named Saul at the beginning of chapter 9. And, he had been looking for some donkeys that were lost. And so he's on this journey, seemingly just looking for donkeys. But then he runs into the town of Ramah and he meets Samuel. All of these things are not accidental. This was God's way of bringing the king that he had selected for them to Samuel. And then Samuel, all Samuel has to do is just follow through with what God told him to do. And, there's a banquet, and we find out tonight that banquet was planned, and it was planned very carefully with all the details covered. And Saul is going to be seated at this banquet. And there's an old word that's not used a lot anymore. I think you'll recognize it. It's called providence. It's just not very commonly used. And we use it a lot of times when we're talking about how God is able to put things in order to give us what we need at the right time. It comes from that word provide. And God provides what we need at the right time. This is one of those examples of the providence of God and the paths of different people are crossing at the right time. And I think you probably have experienced that in your own life. I know I have, and seemingly unaware of what's going on, and the Lord will open a door. And then when you walk through that door, you find out that there was some things that were set in motion weeks or months before, and here I was oblivious to it, but God was working. God was preparing something. And so that's exactly what's happening here, is that God is preparing to set up a king there in Israel. So this thought of God's providing, it continues throughout the chapter. You're going to see more of it tonight. We're going to pick up here in verse 22. Samuel is going to take Saul into a banquet area, and he's going to seat him at a place of honor. The first thing I want you to see is the place of honor. The place of honor. Notice there in verse 22, it says this, Now Samuel took Saul and his servant and brought them into the hall. That's the banquet hall. That's where they're going to eat. And had them sit in the place of honor among those who were invited. There were about 30 persons. And so in verse 22, Saul is seated. And we see something about the dinner party. We don't know exactly who these people are. It says there's about 30 of them. I'm going to tell you what I think about it, but you don't have to agree with me. It's not doctrine. It's not anything to get bent out of shape over. But I think really what this is probably some of the wealthy nobles and military people of the country are invited to this, because a king has to have support. You're not going to rule a nation without some type of support. And really what this looks like to me is Samuel is introducing some of those leaders. Remember, the elders go to him back in chapter 8, and they tell Samuel, we want a king. That's probably who this is. Samuel probably knows that now that Saul is on his way, and so he is invited and set this thing up for these people to meet their king. And so here in verse 23 and 24, Samuel orders it says cook. In verse 23, Samuel said to the cook, that word can be translated butcher, and probably that's what he was, is a butcher and the cook. And it says, bring the portion which I gave you, of which I said to you, set it apart. So you already can tell in verse 23 that there was some planning. There was some pre-planning. He had a previous conversation with the cook or the butcher, and he's reminding him, bring that part of the animal that I said to you, set it apart. And so in verse 24, so the cook did it. He took up the thigh with its upper part and set it before Saul. And Samuel said, here it is. What was kept back? It was kept back for you. Eat, for until this time it has been kept for you, since I said I invited the people. So Saul ate with Samuel that day. And here we once again notice that there's planning. We notice that Saul is being treated as a king. He is being treated at a place of honor. He is the number one guest, and they give him the best portion. And he is honored. So everyone at the table would be able to see that guy down there at the head of the table is someone important. We don't know if they know much about him yet. They're probably looking at each other and whispering and talking and who's that? What's his name? And stuff like that. And so Samuel said, it was set apart for you. One thing I've noticed about this text, and you're going to see it more in just a few minutes, is that Samuel is doing all the directing. He's directing the cook. He's directing the butcher. He's directing Saul. He's the one who's planned it. He's the one who's put this all together. Samuel is in charge of all these things. And so, you see here that Saul ate with Samuel that day. So it's Saul and Samuel. The second thing I want you to see is Samuel and Saul. Notice in verse 25, Samuel continues to lead Saul. When they had come down from the high place, that's where they were eating, into the city, Samuel spoke with Saul on top of the house. And so we don't know what they said, but Samuel has some important things that he needs to tell Saul. We don't know much about Saul's background. We don't know much about his training. We don't know much about his education, but he does come from a wealthy family. He probably was literate. He probably was educated. But Saul is being spoken to by Samuel. In the second half of verse 25, it says Samuel spoke with him on top of the house. That's a private meeting. That their homes would have a flat roof, and sometimes they would sleep on top of these roofs. I don't know if you remember from the Gospel of Mark chapter 2 talks about there was one that was sick of the palsy, and he was being carried on a stretcher. There was no room in the house. So what did they do? They climbed up on top of the house and they began to tear the roof apart and lower him down to the roof. The roof was used for different things, for drying out things. It was used for sleeping sometimes on warm nights. And so they're on top of the house. They're having a conversation. And in verse 26, you see that Samuel, he begins to prepare Saul for his return home. It says they arose early. They get up early in the morning. We're told the time of day here. And the dawning of the day that Samuel called Saul to the top of the house. And so you're being told more in verse 26 about really what happened in verse 25. It says, saying, get up that I may send you on your way. And Saul arose, and both of them went outside, he and Samuel. So Samuel you see Samuel directing Saul, telling him every move that he's going to make. It's interesting. I don't know what to make of it at this point, but as you learn more about the character Saul, you'll probably look back and you'll notice this even more, that Saul has some deficiencies here. Samuel is a leader. Saul is I'm not going to spoil it. You'll learn. Here's something I want to leave you with tonight. Saul is seated at a place of honor, and he is now about to enter into company with people like Moses, with people like Joshua, with people like all of the judges who God had used to lead his people. He is coming into a very important endeavor the task of leading God's people. That shouldn't be taken lightly, and I don't think Saul will take it lightly. He'll do the best that he can. What a tremendous opportunity that Saul has to enter into service for the Lord. I would like for you to turn over to Luke chapter 15. I'm not going to go any further in 1 Samuel tonight. It starts a bigger passage and a bigger story that I don't want to tackle tonight. Luke chapter 14 and verse 15, Jesus gave a parable about a supper. I was reminded of this parable when I was thinking about Saul sitting at this table and how Saul is poised to enter into service for the Lord. He has an opportunity to serve God in a special way, to go down in history, and he did go down in history. But go down in history as what? That is what the question is. Will he be faithful to God, or will he be a wicked king? And so that will be up to him. He has the opportunity to do great things. Notice what Jesus said in Luke chapter 14 and verse 15. Now when one of those who sat at the table with him heard these things, he said to him, "Blessed is he who shall eat bread in the kingdom of God." It is a great honor to sit at the table when God has invited you to the table. To sit at the table, what an honor, what a privilege. Saul has been invited to come to the table and sit and serve God. Well, notice what Jesus said about how this turns out sometimes. In verse 16, then he said to him, here's the parable. A certain man gave a great supper and invited many, and sent his servant at supper time to say to those who were invited, "Come, for all things are now ready." But they all, with one accord, began to make excuses. The first said to him, "I have bought a piece of ground, and I must go and see it. I ask you to have me excused." And another said, "I have bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I am going to test them. I ask you to have me excused." Still another said, "I have married a wife, and therefore I cannot come." So that servant came and reported these things to his master. Then the master of the house, being angry, said to his servant, "Go out quickly into the streets and lanes of the city and bring in here the poor and the maimed and the lame and the blind." And the servant said, "Master, it is done as you commanded, and still there is room." Then the master said to the servant, "Go out into the highways and hedges and compel them to come in, that my house may be filled. For I say to you that none of those men who were invited shall taste my supper." Dear friend, if you'll notice here in verse 23, the goal of the master of the house is that his house may be filled. There are many who are invited, and some will reject that invitation. They'll say, "No, my priorities in my life are much different. I have a wife. I have a job. I have land. I have more important things to do than to come to this supper and sit at the table." Saul has a tremendous opportunity to serve God, and the jury is out on what he'll do with that. But I want to leave you with this. There's an application for you, and there's an application for me here, is that God gives everyone who calls upon his name an opportunity to serve him. The question is what will you do with that opportunity? And a lot of people think that they serve the Lord, when in fact, really, they're serving themselves. Listen to what Jesus is saying. Come to him and serve him. Glorify him. Lift up his name, not your own, his name. Glorify him. He's the one who invited. He is the master of the house. Do you see what it says in verse 24? The parable ends in verse 23, and the explanation is in verse 24. One verse. This is all that needs to be said by Jesus. And Jesus says it in the first person. He says, I say to you that none of those men who were invited shall taste my supper. It's Jesus's party. It's not our party. Jesus had planned the party. Jesus has invited the guest. And Jesus is the one who will determine whether or not people will sit at his table. It's Jesus, not you. Jesus has invited you. And my question is what will we do with it? I'm going to ask our musicians to come. We're going to have a song of invitation. If you will stand.